Carlos Pereira was in his mother's exquisitely decorated living room. It was yet another Monday morning, which meant he should have been at his own home, but his mother wouldn't have it. After dinner the previous evening, he took another look at himself in the mirror. His chiseled face seemed to be carved from the same stone as the massive houses that surrounded him. "Carlos, dear, you should wear the navy blue suit for today's meeting. It makes you look more mature, rather than this one," said his mother, Helena Pereira, entering his room with a cup of coffee in her hands. Carlos closed his eyes, turning his face upward. "Mom, I feel like... Don't forget to tie your tie properly. I can't have you looking like some kind of bohemian." He rolled his eyes in exasperation as he adjusted his tie for the 100th time that morning. Noticing that his mother's eyes were still on him, he headed to the room on the right where his suits were neatly arranged. Grabbing one of the suits from the hanger, he quickly put it on, not wanting to be late. As he left the room, she was waiting at the door. "Don't forget the speech I prepared for you. Once you tell everyone, they'll be convinced. I'll be there before the meeting." "But Mom, shouldn't this be something I write myself? If I tell them how I truly feel about moving the company forward, they'd be happy to be part of it." Helena Pereira sipped her coffee slowly, and her face immediately tightened. The coffee was already cooling, just like her smile. "What did I say about these things? Just trust me, Carlos, do as I say." She placed her free hand on his shoulder. Carlos knew exactly what she meant. She wanted him to do her bidding once again, as always. Her words sounded like a threat. "Fine, Mom. I need to organize the packages for the orphanage first, then I'll head to work." He kissed her cheek before leaving the room and the house. Stepping out of the grand mansion into the fresh morning air, his driver Joaquim was already waiting by the car. "Good morning, sir." "Good morning, Joaquim. Please take me to the orphanage," Carlos nodded, settling into the back seat. As they drove through the city, he gazed out the window, his mind wandering to the upcoming meeting. His mother had prepared a rather lengthy speech, and he wasn't exactly looking forward to it, but he knew very well that he couldn't disobey her. The 20-minute drive ended with their arrival at the orphanage, a combination of 2 large apartments surrounded by a small garden. A woman was already waiting outside, smiling. He stepped out of the car and was immediately greeted by her warm smile.
"Good morning, Sister Margarida."
"Oh, Carlos, dear. Thank you for coming. We are very grateful for your family's support." She shook his hands quickly. Carlos smiled and followed her inside, where he was greeted by the buzz of children. He spent the next hour helping to organize food and clothing packages he had sent earlier that day, chatting with the children, and listening to their stories. "Sir, your mother." Joaquim approached Carlos, who was reading a book to the children, and handed him the phone. Carlos quickly stood up, realizing that if he didn't leave now, he'd be late for the meeting he was supposed to attend. As he prepared to leave, Sister Margarita approached him with a small box. "Carlos, a little gift from the children for your mother." He took the box, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, sister. I'll make sure to give it to her." With one last wave to everyone, he hurried back to the car, and Joaquim drove quickly from the orphanage, knowing they had to beat the clock. When Carlos arrived at the office, he took a deep breath and headed to the conference room where the meeting was being held. His secretary was already waiting for him with the prepared speech. Carlos shuffled the papers in his hands, trying to scan the pages quickly. "Good morning, everyone," he began, trying to sound confident as he entered the conference room. "I'm here today to talk about Verde Tecnologia. Our solar panels harness the energy of the sun and reduce carbon emissions by 50%. He paused, trying to remember the exact figure. He looked at his notes, but his eyes skimmed the page unfocused. "Oh yes. And our wind turbines generate electricity at a rate of 2.5 megawatts. The clients exchanged glances, apparently unimpressed. One of them raised an eyebrow and another jotted something down in their notebook. Carlos tried to recover, but his words only became more muddled. And our energy storage systems use advanced battery technology to optimize energy efficiency and reduce waste. He stopped, struggling to remember the key points he wanted to highlight. The clients exchanged glances, their expressions growing more skeptical. He closed his eyes for a second, trying to compose himself. The room fell silent, and Carlos felt the eyes of the executives and, more importantly, his mother on him. He knew he was struggling but couldn't find his footing. "Let me start over," he said, taking a deep breath. "I'm sorry, I'll get straight to the point." He took a deep breath, avoiding his mother's gaze. He had had a bad feeling from the beginning about using something she had written, and despite practicing, he still wasn't comfortable. "Look, I know we're not just selling solar panels and wind turbines. We're selling a chance to make a difference, a chance to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and create a more sustainable future. At Verde Tecnologia, we believe that our responsibility goes beyond just providing sustainable energy solutions. We are committed to making a positive impact on the communities we serve," he said, pointing to the screen behind him, which showed a content table. The Green Schools program provided educational resources and workshops to teach children about renewable energy and sustainability. We've also partnered with local organizations to develop community gardens and green spaces, providing access to fresh produce and promoting environmental stewardship, he added. "And we are committed to transparency and accountability in everything we do. We publish annual sustainability reports detailing our progress and impact. We also have an independent advisory board to ensure that our practices align with our values and mission." Carlos paused, scanning the room to make eye contact with the clients. "We believe that business can be a force for good, and we are committed to leading by example." The attendees listened attentively, their expressions shifting from skepticism to interest. "I believe in what we do," Carlos smiled, making his conviction clear. "And I know that together we can make a real difference." The room fell silent for a moment before erupting into applause. The clients smiled, nodding in approval. "Thank you, Carlos," one of them finally spoke, looking at his partners in approval. "That was a great presentation. We can see that you are passionate about what your company does." Another executive spoke up. "I have to say, I was skeptical at first, but you really convinced me of your company's values. Could you tell us more about what you do?" Carlos smiled, relieved that the presentation had gone well. "Of course. Our company, Verde Tecnologia, specializes in sustainable energy solutions. We design and implement renewable energy systems for businesses and homes, helping them reduce their carbon footprint and save on energy costs." One of the executives asked. "That sounds impressive. Can you give us some examples of your work?" He nodded. "We have worked with several large companies to install solar panels and wind turbines, reducing their energy costs by up to 50%. We also help homeowners switch to renewable energy sources, reducing their dependence on fossil fuels." The executives nodded, taking notes and asking follow-up questions. After a few minutes of Q&A, one of them said, "Thank you, I think we have found a partner." Carlos excused himself from the meeting room, feeling relieved that the presentation had gone well. When he entered his office, he was closely followed by his mother, who seemed less than pleased. "Carlos, what was that?" she demanded, closing the door behind her. "You didn't follow the plan." He looked at his mother, trying to stay calm. "Mom, I know I didn't stick to the script, but I felt I needed to speak from the heart." "Speak from the heart?" "This is business, Carlos, not a charity event to make you feel good. You need to stick to the plan and make a strong impression." "But Mom, I think I made a good impression. The clients seem to respond well to my passion." "Passion?" She interrupted him again. "This isn't about passion, Carlos, it's about doing business and growing the company. You need to focus on the bottom line, not your feelings." Without a word, he walked past his mother, opening the door. "I need some air." "Carlos, what are you doing? You can't just leave in the middle of the day." His mother began to protest, but he was already determined not to stay another minute with her. When he left the building, Joaquim, his driver, was waiting by the car, looking somewhat concerned. "Sir, Should I take you somewhere? He asked. No, Joachim, I need some time alone. I'll drive myself, I'll be fine. Despite his reassurances, Joachim didn't look convinced, but there was nothing he could do. Carlos got into the car and drove off, wanting to be away from everything. He drove aimlessly, trying to clear his mind, until he found himself in a quiet, seemingly upscale neighborhood. He parked the car in a secure spot and wandered through the streets, trying to process his emotions. Carlos's steps led him to a small restaurant hidden among skyscrapers. The exterior was unremarkable, but something about it drew him inside. He pushed open the door, and a bell above it rang, breaking the silence. As he entered, his eyes slowly adjusted to the lighting, and he spotted a young woman wiping tables with a white cloth. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and a warm smile appeared on her lips. When she looked up and met his gaze, for a moment, they just stared at each other. Hello, she said, letting the white cloth fall onto the table, breaking the spell. Welcome. Well, we don't have a name yet, actually, she laughed, and Carlos's heart skipped a beat. But we're getting there. We're not open yet, but you should come back in a week for our grand opening. As he prepared to leave, Carlos glimpsed his reflection in the window, a young man who felt he wanted more. He took a deep breath, savoring the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the warmth of the restaurant, for the first time in a long time feeling that he was exactly where he needed to be. But if you don't mind, could I get something to drink? She asked. We're still testing our menu, but I can prepare something special. Carlos turned around, nodding eagerly as he sat at the counter, still watching her. Try this, she handed him a glass filled with a velvety liquid shortly after. It's one of our exclusive drinks. We call it Midnight Sky. As he took a sip, he wondered why she seemed like an enigma. His eyes widened in surprise as he took another sip, the flavors danced on his tongue, and he could only describe it as something between sweet and savory. This is really amazing, he smiled at her, finishing the rest of the drink in the glass. The young woman's eyes crinkled at the corners. I'm glad you like it. I'm sorry, I know it's not the right place to ask, but what brought you here? The place clearly looks uninhabited, especially from the outside. Carlos hesitated, unsure of what exactly to say to someone he had just met. It's been a tough day for me. I know the day's not over yet, but it is what it is. My mom is constantly on my back. Well, aren't they all? She laughed, placing her hands on the counter. What exactly did she do this time? My mom. She just can't leave me alone. She wants to be involved in everything I'm doing and also makes every effort to ensure that her decision is my final decision. Even when you're against it? She asked. He sighed, nodding slowly. Even when I don't want it. All I want is for her to see that I'm an adult. Of course she sees that, but maybe she just doesn't want to admit it yet. Perhaps she simply doesn't want to accept that you're not her little boy anymore. I think things like that can be pretty scary sometimes. Carlos watched her as her forehead glistened with droplets of sweat from working, but it didn't diminish her beauty. I didn't catch your name earlier. I'm Carlos, he said. She smiled, immediately stepping away from the counter. I'm Sophia. He looked at his watch, suddenly shocked by how much time had passed. How did I spend so much time here? Was it your beauty that captivated me, or the drink? Sophia gave him a look, making him laugh. Don't flatter me, Carlos. It's probably the drink. Carlos hesitated, not wanting the moment to end. Can I see you again? Sophia raised an eyebrow, giving him a funny look. I don't know. I'm quite busy with the restaurant. My birthday is coming up, and I'd love for you to be there. It would mean a lot to me. She laughed with a tone of amusement in her voice. I don't know, I might be busy for a while. We're still getting everything in order here. Carlos nodded, understanding. I get it. But anyway, we should exchange contacts. I'd like to keep in touch, he said. Okay, sure, but But no promises. Okay, no promises, I swear. I just want to make sure I can find you again, he smiled, feeling triumphant. I think we'll see each other again. See you later. He quickly left the restaurant. It took a few weeks before Carlos even thought about mentioning Sofia to his mother before his birthday. Carlos, what are you thinking? A Pereira doesn't associate with service industry workers, she shot him a look, dropping the spoon. Carlos shifted uncomfortably, knowing he had displeased his mother. Mom, I just met her. And it doesn't matter. You need to maintain a certain social level, Carlos, she huffed, shaking her head. Do you expect me to accept you dating a waitress? What would that portray for the company? He sighed dramatically, as the food suddenly tasted bland in his mouth. Please, Mom, give her a chance. She's not at all what you think. Helena looked at her beloved son, her only child, and smiled. I've organized a dinner for this weekend, and it was supposed to be just the two of us. Now that you've told me this. What's her name?
Sofia.
Thank you, dear. She'll be here, he stood up, excited that his mother had changed her mind. I'm off now, I have a trip tomorrow. He had barely left his mother's mansion when he sent a message to Sofia about the dinner. He wanted to call her, but she had scolded him several times for texting while he was working. It wasn't what she planned to do that weekend, but it didn't hurt to go. The weekend arrived quickly, and Sofia arrived at the property, impressed by the grandeur of the entrance gate. When she got out of the taxi, she was taken aback by the opulent decor, and a wave of embarrassment washed over her as she looked at her clothes. Upon entering, she was again struck by the opulence of the decor and the well-dressed staff. Carlos, why didn't you tell me? She whispered to Carlos, who was waiting outside for her. I feel so out of place. Carlos seemed surprised by her reaction.
I'm sorry, Sofia.
You look beautiful anyway. Don't flatter me, I'm warning you for the last time, she playfully tapped his arm. You never told me you lived in another world. This isn't an exaggerated compliment now, he leaned in toward her, smiling. I'm glad I didn't tell you. Otherwise, you wouldn't have agreed to give me your number. Sofia was about to retort when she heard someone clapping. Looking in the direction of the sound, she saw a stunning woman dressed in a long black dress. I would have left you two outside, but dinner is about to begin, dear.
Sofia, come in.
Sofia exchanged a look with Carlos, who smiled and directed her to his mother. This is my mother, Helena Pereira. Sofia and Helena walked into the mansion together, and Sofia tried not to let her jaw drop in awe at how beautiful everything was. When they arrived in the dining room, which, in Sofia's opinion, was larger than the entire restaurant, all the maids were lined up at the ends of the room. Carlos pulled out a chair for her, making her smile as she sat down. He sat next to her, across from his mother, who couldn't stop looking at them. When they were about to start eating, Carlos's phone rang, and he answered. I'm sorry, but there's something I need to take care of right now. I'll be back before you know it, he squeezed Sofia's hand gently before leaving the table. Well, the dinner must continue. He'll join us soon, so please eat, Helena gestured to Sofia, who began to eat. Tell me, Rosa, what inspired your choice of attire? Interesting. Sofia looked up, smiling. It's Sofia, ma'am. I just thought it was a pretty dress, I guess. Helena smiled sweetly. Well, it's certainly eye-catching. And your profession? Tell me, what is it like to be a waitress? It's quite an experience, ma'am. I interact with different people every day, and it's fun for me. Sometimes, the restaurant has peak hours, which means everyone has to be busy. You talk as if that's a good thing. Sofia's eyes drifted to the side as she thought to herself, for me, it's better than doing nothing. Speaking of which, Carlos's birthday ball will be the event of the season. The guest list is a true selection of society. I dare say it will be a night to remember. We'll have royalty, celebrities, and business magnates all present. It will be a night of glamour and sophistication like you've never experienced, I'm sure. Helena paused, taking a sip of her wine, savoring the moment and the setting. It will be stunning. We've rented the entire property, and the decorations will be exquisite. I spared no expense to ensure this is a night to remember. After all, Carlos deserves nothing but the best. Sophia's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the high-profile event. She couldn't help but feel a twinge of hesitation about attending. "Oh, I'm sure it will be," Sophia replied, trying to sound indifferent despite her growing doubts. As the night drew to a close, Carlos walked Sophia to the door, thanking her for coming. "I'm sorry if my mom was a bit much," he whispered, holding her hands. Sophia gave a faint smile. "I had a good time. The only thing missing was you. You were absent for most of the dinner." "I'm sorry." "I'm truly very sorry," he pulled her into a hug. The next day, Sophia received a dress along with a note from Helena. "Dear Sophia, I thought this dress would be perfect for Carlos's birthday ball. Formal events can be so intimidating, and I wanted to help. Best wishes, Helena." Sophia touched the hem of the fabric, noting that it seemed expensive enough. What pleased her the most was her mother-in-law's kind gesture. After the dinner the night before, she was slightly convinced that Helena didn't like her, but this showed otherwise. After settling into her apartment following the dinner, she rummaged through her wardrobe, searching for something nice to wear for his birthday. But she didn't need to do that now. Once again, Sophia had something unique to wear on the day of the event. She put on the elegant black dress that clearly was made of luxurious fabric, hugging her curves in all the right places. The dress fell just above her knees and had a lovely neckline that didn't reveal too much of her cleavage. She paired the dress with a pair of silver heels that added a few inches to her height. The shoes were a gift from Carlos, who sent them along with jewelry when she told him her mother had sent a dress. She was glad the shoes were comfortable enough to wear for a few hours. Her look was completed with a simple necklace and a pair of pearl earrings that Carlos had bought for her. She kept her hair simple, pulling it back into a low ponytail. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she felt confident and beautiful. All she needed to do now was go out and get into the car that Carlos had sent for her. Sophia arrived at the mansion and was amazed by the decoration. Upon reaching the door, she was greeted by a team of security and event staff who were checking the guests' invitations and IDs. Sophia approached them confidently, expecting to be allowed in without any problems. "Good evening, welcome to the event," one of the staff greeted her, looking her up and down. "May I see your invitation, please?" She hesitated, realizing she didn't have an invitation. "I'm a guest of Carlos," she said. "He personally invited me." The staff member raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, but I need to see your invitation or confirmation email to let you in." At that moment, a woman with an iPad and a stern expression approached them. "I'm the event coordinator," she introduced herself, holding up the iPad to verify Sophia's face. "I'm afraid this woman is not on the guest list." The event coordinator turned to Sophia. "I'm sorry, but you're not authorized to enter. You'll need to leave." Sophia stepped away from the entrance and took out her phone. She dialed Carlos's number, hoping he would answer and clear up the misunderstanding, but the phone rang and rang with no response. Sophia tried again, thinking he might be busy or didn't hear, but again there was no answer. She sent a text, trying to keep her emotions in check. "Hi, it's Sophia. I'm outside. They won't let me in. What's going on?" But there was no reply. Sophia felt a wave of concern and frustration. Why wasn't Carlos answering her calls or messages? Carlos's eyes scanned the room, searching for Sophia, who had previously informed him she was on her way, but as the minutes passed, he couldn't help but feel a bit distracted. If she had arrived, she would have come to say hi. Where was she? He assumed she was simply mingling with the guests, but as he moved through the crowd, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Finally, he checked his phone and saw the missed calls from Sophia. His heart sank as he quickly dialed her number. "Sophia, where are you?" he asked, alarmed by the number of missed calls. I'm outside, she replied sadly. They won't let me in. My name wasn't on the list. Carlos's face fell as he realized the mistake. He quickly apologized and headed to the entrance, where he found Sofia, stunning in the dress his mother had sent. But as he escorted her to the celebration, he couldn't help but notice the curious glances from the other guests. I'm so sorry. There must have been some sort of confusion. Please forgive me. Sofia looked at him for a moment before walking towards the champagne table and grabbing a glass for herself. For a moment, I thought about going home and forgetting the whole thing. Thank your stars you made it in time. Thank you for not leaving, Carlos replied, relieved. He was about to say more when a man approached, informing him that his attention was needed. I'm sorry, I'll be right back. Have fun, he said, and with that he was out of sight. At first, Sofia tried to make the most of the evening, but as time went on, she began to sense that something was wrong. People looked at her strangely, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Excuse me, could you refill my drink? Someone tapped her on the shoulder. The others all seem busy, so please be quick. Sofia looked over her shoulder, uncertain if the woman was talking to her. I'm sorry, but you're mistaken, I'm not a waitress. The woman laughed. You're serious? It was then that Sofia realized the dress she was wearing was identical to the house staff's uniform. She was being mistaken for a servant, and the guests found it amusing. I'm not a servant, she repeated, more to herself than to the woman. I'm a guest. But the woman looked at her with disdain and snorted. Sorry, I must have confused you with someone from the staff. Sofia felt a mix of embarrassment and anger. She knew she needed to find Carlos and get out of there as quickly as possible. She looked around for the restroom, needing to avoid the mocking glances before they reached her. Fortunately, the restroom was empty at that moment. She entered one of the stalls and locked the door, wanting to be alone. She heard the door open, and loud voices filled the restroom. Can you believe that dress? One of them turned on the faucet, laughing. It looks like she's trying to be a servant or something. I know, right? The other woman responded, laughing. I saw her trying to blend in with the guests and thought, girl, you're not fooling anyone. Sofia felt a pang of shame and embarrassment. She couldn't believe she had been so blind to Helena's scheme. What she had thought was a kind gesture now felt like a cruel trick. She quickly left the restroom as the women departed, trying to hold back tears. She couldn't take it anymore, she needed to find Carlos and tell him what was happening. But as she approached him, she saw Helena walking towards her with open arms. I hope you know where you belong now, Helena whispered in her ear before Sofia could pull away from the hug. At that moment, she knew she needed to leave before things got worse. As Sofia turned to leave, a guest intentionally spilled their drink on her. Look at the help now. Why don't you go clean that up? Enough, I've had enough, she muttered, closing her eyes and trying to hold back the tears. She pushed through the crowd that was starting to form, desperate to escape, but found a wall of paparazzi. Who are you? One of them asked, snapping photos. I'm nobody, just leave me alone. But they kept taking pictures. Carlos, on the other hand, was discussing with a potential client about the company when he heard murmurs. Looking in that direction, he spotted Sofia. Excuse me, Carlos interrupted the man he was talking to and began walking towards where he last saw her. He saw her moving towards the exit, her clothes stained and surrounded by paparazzi, but when he reached the entrance, he saw Sofia getting into a taxi. Sofia, wait, he called out, but the taxi door closed behind her, and the car drove away. He had to make things right. He grabbed his phone and dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried again and again, but she didn't answer. He knew he needed to talk to her, explain what had happened, and apologize for his mother's mistake, but for now she was gone, and Carlos was left alone outside his own party, feeling helpless and embarrassed. Weeks passed, and Carlos's distraction at work worsened each day. His mother, Helena, noticed the change in him and confronted him. "Carlos, what's happening with you? You're not focused on the company at all. We can't afford to lose our edge now, when we're on the verge of being acquired." Carlos sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know, Mom. I'll try to focus." But he couldn't get Sofia out of his mind. He tried to immerse himself in work, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her. He wondered if she was okay, if she had forgiven him. As the days turned into weeks, Carlos became increasingly withdrawn. He stopped attending meetings, answering calls, and rarely left his office. His mother grew concerned, but Carlos couldn't explain what was wrong because he didn't really know himself. One night, he found himself outside the restaurant where they had met, hoping to see her, but Sofia wasn't there. The next day, he drove to her house, hoping to find her, but she wasn't there either. Feeling desperate, Carlos decided to wait for her outside her apartment. He arrived in the morning and sat in his car, watching the entrance. As the hours passed, he started to feel like he was hallucinating. But then he saw her. His heart skipped a beat. He wondered if he was dreaming, but Sofia saw him and smiled. "Carlos, what are you doing here?" she asked, standing next to the car window. He got out of the car, feeling like he was in a trance. "I don't know, I just needed to see you." Sofia nodded, and with the door slightly open, Carlos followed her inside the apartment, feeling like he was entering a dream. The living room was decorated with various hand-drawn characters. Sofia led him to the couch, and they sat together. "I missed you," Carlos began to say. Immediately, Sofia took his hand. "I missed you too." They sat there in silence for a moment, hands entwined. Then Sofia spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about us, Carlos, about what happened at the party." Carlos nodded, feeling a pang of guilt.
"I'm so sorry, Sofia."
"I didn't know what happened until later when I heard someone spilled wine on you." Sofia squeezed his hand. "You didn't know, Carlos. But it was hard for me. I felt so alone and exposed out there."
"I'm sorry, Sofia."
"I should have known and shouldn't have left you alone. It's been torturous waking up every morning knowing I can't reach you." She smiled at seeing the pain in his eyes and understood that it had been hard for him too. "Shall we go to dinner? What better way to celebrate this?" Carlos let out a sigh of relief, hugging her and holding her as if there were no tomorrow. "Thank you for forgiving me, thank you." She held him tightly, and he continued to murmur his gratitude. Only after she had refreshed herself did they decide to go out to eat. As they left the apartment hand in hand, Carlos noticed a black limousine parked behind his car. His steps slowed, alerting Sofia, who followed his gaze. "What is my mother doing here?" he murmured to himself as Sofia tightened her grip on his hand. Sofia's eyes widened as the chauffeur got out of the limousine and approached them. "Miss Sofia, your grandfather requests your presence immediately." Carlos's eyes narrowed at the man, and he positioned himself in front of Sofia as a barrier. "Who is your grandfather?" "I don't know what's happening, but I have to go," Sofia replied. The chauffeur opened the door, waiting for Sofia to enter. "Please, miss, your grandfather is waiting." Sofia turned to Carlos. "Will you come with me?" "Of course, I wouldn't follow just anyone." As they entered the limousine, Sofia's anxiety increased. "I've never seen my grandfather send a limousine before. Something must be wrong. I hope he's okay. The last time he wasn't well, he didn't tell me. I hope everything is fine." Carlos held her hand, trying to reassure her. "We'll face this together." The limousine stopped in front of a large commercial building with the Verde Tecnologia logo displayed on the side. "Wait, why are we here? This is your family's building, right?" Sofia asked as they got out of the car. Carlos was trying to understand why they were there. Looking at the chauffeur, he gestured for them to enter. They quickly entered the building, and as they exited the elevator, Carlos and Sofia heard someone speaking in one of the offices. Carlos knew exactly where it was, and both arrived there still confused. A man with his back to them was addressing the people in the room about how things would be conducted differently. Someone in the room must have alerted the man to their presence, as he turned to them with a smile. "Ah, there she is. Your new CEO has arrived," he announced to the room, which burst into applause. "Grandpa." Sofia rushed forward, relieved to see that he was okay but confused by his statement. Sofia's grandfather laughed. "Yes, my dear. I'm afraid I've kept my true identity and wealth hidden from you, but I've been preparing you for leadership all along." Carlos's mind spun as he tried to process the information. Sofia, the woman he loved, was now the CEO of Verde Tecnologia. His mother had told him about some succession issues, but he wasn't in his normal state to realize it. Sofia's grandfather continued. "I had you work at one of my restaurants, with my security monitoring your progress. You showed great potential, my dear, and now it's time for you to take control." Helena's face turned pale, her eyes darting from Sofia to Carlos. "This can't be," she whispered. Jorge's expression grew severe as he pulled Helena into the office, along with Carlos and Sofia. "I know what happened at the birthday party, Helena. Treating my beloved granddaughter that way was unforgivable." Helena's eyes kept shifting between Jorge, Carlos, and Sofia, as she felt the color drain from her face. "I can explain." Sofia's grandfather, Jorge, interrupted her. "No, you can't. My initial intention was to sell the company in pieces, leaving you and your son with crumbs after paying the board. But seeing how much my granddaughter loves Carlos and how much he loves her, and since he wasn't part of the scheme, I changed my mind." Carlos's eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean by what happened at the party?" Sofia took a deep breath. "Your mother humiliated me, Carlos. She made me wear a uniform identical to the staff's, and people thought I was a servant." "Mom, is this true? Are they telling the truth? Why would you do something like this to her?" Carlos approached his mother, who avoided his gaze. That was when he realized. He remembered the looks people gave when she arrived at the event. That's why his mother didn't want him away from her after the incident at his birthday. "This will be the last time we have a conversation, Mom. I never thought you'd go so far as to treat her so poorly. You should be better than that." Jorge nodded. "I'm glad to see you're not like your mother, Carlos. But now it's no longer up to me. Ask the new CEO. No, I don't think you should be an employee here." Carlos nodded, accepting their decision. He understood how things might end. "Because I think you'd be better managing," Jorge added. Carlos thought he wasn't hearing correctly, but Sofia's smile confirmed that he had heard right. "Are you serious? Do you mean it?" "Yes, I do. You've proven yourself, Carlos. You have the heart and the skills to lead this company to greatness." Carlos pulled her into a hug, inhaling the scent around her. "Thank you, my love." In the corner of the room, Helena watched her son and the girl she thought was resolved embrace. It was more humiliating than she could have imagined. It was as if she didn't exist. Helena stood there until Jorge invited them to a quick celebratory dinner. Only then did she crumble, falling to her knees as tears streamed down her face. She couldn't help but wish she could turn back time. She had hoped for many things, but she hadn't expected everything to go so wrong for her. Helena began to realize the impact of her actions when she went to her favorite social club for lunch. The maître looked at her coldly, and the usual table by the window was given to someone else. "I'm afraid we're fully booked today, Mrs. Pereira." Helena was stunned. She had always been treated like royalty at that club. As she left, she saw her friends whispering and pointing at her. They quickly averted their gaze, avoiding eye contact. Helena felt a chill run down her spine. She tried to shake the feeling, telling herself it was just her imagination, but as days passed, things only got worse. She was no longer invited to exclusive events, and her calls were no longer returned. Her bank account started to dwindle, and she realized her money wouldn't get her anywhere. Helena's world was falling apart around her. She had lost everything, her reputation, her friends, her status. And all because of her own cruel actions. She tried to contact her son Carlos, but he refused to take her calls. He had disowned her, just like everyone else, and it hurt more than anything else. If only she had been more sensible and mature, she wouldn't be in the mess she was in. She never thought that one day everything she once had would no longer be hers. Meanwhile, Sophia pushed the baby stroller through the quiet neighborhood streets, unable to shake a feeling of contentment. Her life had taken a dramatic turn since she met Carlos, and she was grateful for every moment they spent together. Their daughter, Esmeralda, was the light of their lives, and she couldn't imagine a future without her. Sophia took a deep breath, savoring the sweet aroma of blooming flowers and fresh bread from nearby bakeries. She thought about her life and all the good things that had happened since she met Carlos. She remembered how he looked at her on their first date and the picnic they had weeks after he started working as CEO of the company. She remembered how he held her hand while teaching her to ride a bike. She thought about their wedding day, which came so quickly, but she wasn't nervous. She had what she thought she could never have at one point in her life. Her grandfather, always loving and caring, had done everything to make the day splendid for her. Sophia couldn't wish for anything more. And of course, there was Esmeralda, her beautiful daughter. Sophia's heart swelled with love as she thought about her little girl. As she pushed the stroller, Sophia felt grateful for the life she had built. She thought about how Carlos supported her, encouraged her, and loved her for who she was. She thought about how Esmeralda brought joy and laughter every day. Sophia's heart was full as she walked, the stroller gliding smoothly along the sidewalk. She felt like the luckiest person in the world and knew she would never take this life, this love, for granted. As she turned the corner, she saw someone who looked familiar. At first, she thought it was just a coincidence, but as she got closer, she knew she wasn't imagining things. It was Helena. The woman turned, holding the hands of children, one in each hand. When she saw it was Sophia, she gasped, and her eyes immediately filled with tears. "Sophia, how are you?" Helena asked, her voice trembling. Sophia smiled upon seeing her mother-in-law. She seemed to have lost all the sparkle she had years ago, her once smooth skin was now filled with wrinkles. "I'm well. Who are these beauties with you?" Sophia gestured to the children Helena was holding. "Hi darlings, how are you?" The children, who were busy looking at the nearby park, didn't notice Sophia's greeting. "I'm sorry, Sophia," Helena suddenly apologized. "It's okay, Helena. I have nothing against you. I'm sorry for everything that happened to you." Helena's eyes filled with tears. "I was so blind, Sophia. I thought money and status were everything, but I've learned my lesson. Being kind to people is what really matters. I'm glad you've learned that. And I want to offer you something. The company is yours, if you want it." Helena shook her head. "No, Sophia. I don't want it. I've realized that money isn't everything. I'm just happy to have experienced change. I know it's late, but this is my daughter, Esmeralda Pereira. Carlos and I got married and had a beautiful daughter." Sophia removed the cloth covering Esmeralda and gestured for Helena to see. "Esmeralda," Helena repeated, her voice trembling with emotion. Sophia nodded, smiling. "This way, we can remember you." Helena felt a wave of emotion seeing Esmeralda. No one had ever named a child in her honor before. She had always been the one to hurt people, causing pain and suffering, but now this little girl, this beautiful and innocent child, carried her name. Tears welled up in Helena's eyes as she looked at Esmeralda. She felt a sense of pride and joy she had never felt before. She extended a trembling hand and gently touched Esmeralda's cheek. "Oh my dear," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm so honored. I don't deserve it, but I'm so grateful." Sophia smiled and hugged Helena tightly. "You deserve it, Helena. You deserve all the love and joy in the world." As Helena held Esmeralda in her arms, she felt a sense of redemption. She knew she had been given a second chance, a chance to be a good grandmother to this little girl, to be a good person. "We want to go to the park. We want to go to the park," the children she was holding said in unison. Helena smiled and nodded. "Not today, kids. But I promise we'll have fun anyway." Sophia looked at her curiously. "These little ones are from the orphanage where I do volunteer work. I'm helping take care of them today. They don't have families, so I like to spend time with them and make them feel loved." "Oh, Helena. That's amazing. I had no idea you were involved with an orphanage. How did you get started with that?" "I realized that I had been given a second chance and wanted to use it to make a difference in others' lives. These children deserve love and care, and I'm happy to provide that for them. You know, I've been thinking. Despite our past differences, I'd like to extend an olive branch. Would you like to come to our house for dinner sometime?" Helena was surprised by the invitation. She hadn't expected Sophia to reach out to her, especially after everything that had happened. "I don't know, Sophia," Helena said hesitantly. "I'm not sure if it's a good idea." Sophia nodded. "I know we haven't always agreed, but I think it's time to leave the past behind. We're family, after all. And I'd like to get to know you better. I'm sure it's time for you and Carlos to reconcile." Helena was touched by Sophia's words. She had never expected her daughter-in-law to extend a hand, especially when she had been the one to mistreat her. "Okay," she agreed. "I'll come for dinner, but just me, not the children from the orphanage." Sophia smiled. "Of course, just you. I'll make sure to cook something special." Helena stood outside Sophia's house, taking a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. She hadn't seen her son, Carlos, in years and didn't know what to expect. The door opened, and Sophia smiled warmly. "Elena, come in." She entered, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Carlos. He looked older, more mature, but his eyes still carried a hint of the pain she had caused. "Carlos," she called, not moving from where she stood. "Mom." Helena took a step forward, her hands extended. "Carlos, I don't know where to begin. I'm sorry for everything I did. I was wrong to treat you the way I did." Carlos looked at her with suspicion, but Sophia approached, placing a hand on his arm. "Carlos, please listen to her." He nodded, and Helena continued. "I know I can never undo the pain I caused, but I want you to know that I love you. I've always loved you, and I'm proud of the man you've become." He looked at her, his eyes searching for sincerity. She had done many things that hurt him, things that took him a long time to get over. But now she was here, so slowly he nodded. "I love you too, Mom." Helena felt a lump form in her throat as Carlos opened his arms, and she stepped into them, holding him tightly. The world seemed to stop at that moment, as if they were the only ones there. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. She didn't bother to wipe them away. Carlos, with his own eyes wet with tears, assured her. "I forgive you, Mom. I forgive you." As they hugged, Sophia smiled, feeling at peace. This was what she had wanted for so long, for Carlos and Helena to reconcile. After a few moments, Carlos pulled away, smiling. "Let's sit down. We have a lot to talk about." Helena nodded, smiling, and the three of them sat in the living room, talking and laughing together, as it should be. As the evening went on, Helena felt a joy she hadn't felt in years. She had her son back, and she was grateful for it. Carlos held his wife's hand, and they shared a look. Of all the things he had been blessed with in life, she was the most amazing of all. "Thank you," he said with his lips, making her smile like a schoolgirl who had just fallen in love. And if you liked this video, subscribe to the channel, like, comment and share this story.